The thermal regulator situation in the loading bay section had been ongoing for 3 weeks, and Tam Voss had, in 3 weeks, filed 2 maintenance requests, spoken to the maintenance office on 4 separate occasions, and arrived at the working theory that the maintenance office was operating on a philosophical framework in which problems became urgent only when they had caused a sufficient quantity of damage to justify the cost of repair. A framework that made a certain institutional sense and that Tam found, from the operational end, consistently maddening. He was thinking about this as he collected his tray from the cantina line and turned to face the room, which was doing what the cantina did at the end of the shift cycle, filling with the specific, productive density of people who had been working for several hours and had arrived at the point where food was the most important variable in their immediate future. He did the spatial accounting automatically: available seating, proximity to the noise concentrations, tables that were shared versus tables that were going to require the specific, sometimes awkward negotiation of sitting with a stranger. The corner table had a single occupant. She was Solvari. He knew Solvari from 11 years of the station's alien population, which was diverse in the way of working stations that sat on useful freight corridors and didn't ask many questions. She had a datapad and the specific quality of positioning that said, "I am working, and I am not looking for conversation," which was a quality he recognized and respected, and which was, practically speaking, compatible with sharing a table because sharing a table didn't require conversation. It just required the other person to be willing to share the spatial resource, which was different. The chair across from her was empty. He walked over. She had the bioluminescent markings at the collarbones and forearms that were standard Solvari physiology. He didn't know what they meant in detail, didn't have the cultural reading for them, knew they communicated things to people who could read them the way a uniform communicated things to people who knew the insignia. What they communicated to him was, Solvari, female working, probably prefers to be left alone. "Is this seat taken?" he said. She looked up from the datapad. She had gray eyes, a Solvari characteristic he'd seen before, but they had the specific quality of eyes that were surprised by being looked at, and he filed this as, "Probably prefers to be left alone," confirmed. She looked at the empty chair. She looked at him. She nodded. "Thanks," he said, and sat down and put his tray on the table and picked up his fork. The thermal regulator had been on his mind for 3 weeks, and the maintenance office's response to his most recent inquiry had contained a phrase that he was still processing: remediation pending resource allocation review, which was the institutional language for not yet dressed up in administrative clothing, and which he found, as he found all administrative clothing for not yet, aesthetically offensive. "The maintenance office on this station," he said, to no particular audience, "has a concept of urgency that I find philosophically incompatible with actual operations." He was not specifically addressing her. He was saying a thing that was in his head because it was in his head, and he was eating and eating alone, while thinking was a recipe for the specific, unproductive quality of thinking that went in circles. He said things when he ate alone that he would say to a colleague if a colleague were present, which was a habit he developed over 11 years of sometimes eating alone, and which occasionally produced conversations with strangers, and occasionally produced the polite non-engagement of a stranger who did not want to be included in his thoughts about maintenance scheduling, and both outcomes were fine. She looked up from the datapad. "The loading bay section," he said, because context seemed warranted. "Thermal regulator, 3 weeks, 2 maintenance requests." She looked at him with the specific, slightly arrested quality of someone who has been addressed, and is processing whether the addressing was intentional. "The Bay 3 regulators have been running below threshold for 6 weeks, she said, and then appeared to surprise herself by having said it. "Bay 3, he said. "I'm Bay 7, so I haven't had visibility into 6 weeks. "I did an inventory run through there last month," she said. "The temperature readings on the cold chain cargo were outside spec." She paused, with the quality of someone who has said more than they intended and is deciding whether to continue. I flagged it in my report. Did the report go to the maintenance office or to the cargo office? Cargo office, she said. Then it went into a different system than mine, he said. Which means the maintenance office has two separate incident records that they haven't connected. He ate for a moment. That explains the resource allocation review. They don't think it's urgent because they're only seeing one facility's request. She was quiet for a moment. She had the specific quality of someone doing mental accounting on something. If you forward your incident record to cargo office and I forward my report to maintenance, the documentation will converge on the same regulatory review chain, she said. He looked at her. That would work, he said. The Confederacy maintenance regulation requires escalated response when two separate incident records document the same deficiency, she said, in the tone of someone who had read the regulation and found it useful. They cannot classify it as pending resource allocation review if there are cross-departmental incident records. I did not know that regulation existed, he said. Most dock operations personnel don't, she said. It's in the facility management code rather than the operations manual. He ate for a moment, processing this. How do you know the facility management code? Transit inventory work requires cargo environment compliance documentation, she said. I read the relevant regulations. She paused. I read a significant number of regulations. That is extremely useful, he said. I'm Tam Voss, Bay 7 dock crew. She looked at him with the arrested quality again, slightly less this time, calibrating in real time to the specific situation of a stranger who had asked to sit, talked about a maintenance problem, and was now introducing himself, which was a sequence that did not match any category she appeared to have been expecting. Sael, she said, transit inventory. Sael, he said, thank you for the regulation. I'm going to file the cross-reference tomorrow morning. She nodded. She looked back at her datapad. He ate his food and thought about the maintenance code and the cargo office and the specific, satisfying quality of a bureaucratic problem, finding a bureaucratic solution, which was the best kind of solution for bureaucratic problems because it used the system against itself. What's the inventory for? He said, because he was curious and the datapad was clearly work, and she had mentioned the transit broker in the way of someone who was working for a transit broker, and he was curious in the plain way of a man eating his meal. She looked up. I'm sorry. The inventory analysis, he said. What's the current cargo run? She looked at him with the specific quality of someone recalibrating again, slightly differently this time, in the direction of someone who has been asked a question they were not expecting to be asked. Not because the question was unusual, but because the asking was. Pharmaceutical transit, she said. Cold chain pharmaceuticals from the Kethori production facilities. The routing came through 3 relay stations, and the documentation chain has discrepancies that I'm reconciling. 3 relay stations, he said. That's a long chain. What kind of discrepancies? She looked at him. He was eating and looking at her with the plain curiosity of a man who had asked a question and was waiting for the answer. And she told him about the discrepancies. The weight classification drift across the relay stations that indicated either inconsistent measurement protocols or something more deliberate. The documentation dating that didn't align with the transit timestamps. The specific pattern she was building toward that was going to require either a compliance filing or a direct inquiry to the second relay station's cargo office, depending on what the final reconciliation showed. She told him in the abbreviated version, and he asked a follow-up question about the weight classification drift, and she told him in a version that was slightly less abbreviated, and he asked another question that was the question that actually got at the interesting part of the problem, which she had not expected from a dock crew team lead, and which prompted the version that was not abbreviated at all. He listened with the quality of someone following the logic rather than waiting for his turn. She had been talking for 7 minutes before she became aware that she had been talking for 7 minutes, and she stopped, with the automatic censoring of someone who has just noticed that they have taken up more space than they meant to. "The second relay station's cargo office," he said. "You think they're the source of the drift, or you think they're the point where someone else's drift became documented." She looked at him. "The second," she said. "The pattern suggests awareness rather than origin. The documentation change is too clean at that node to be error. So someone at the second station knew about the drift and documented around it rather than flagged it," he said. "That is my current hypothesis," she said. "What happens when you file the compliance report?" "The relay station certification comes under review," she said. "If the documentation change is found to be intentional, the cargo office loses its certified status." He nodded slowly, with the expression of a man who worked in cargo and understood what a cargo office losing certified status meant for everyone downstream of it. "That's going to disrupt a lot of pharmaceutical routing." "Yes," she said, "but the cold chain has to be documented correctly." "Yes," she said, "because otherwise people get bad pharmaceuticals." "Yes," she said. He ate for a moment. "That's a significant piece of work for one inventory analyst," he said. She looked at her tray. "It is within my scope," she said. "I didn't say it wasn't," he said. "I said it was significant." She looked at him. He was eating with the expression of a man who had said what he meant and meant what he said, and who had not said it to be complimentary or to produce a specific effect, just because it was true and true things were worth saying. She did not have a ready response to this, because the ready responses she had developed over 26 years were designed for a different conversational architecture. "Yes," she said, "it is significant work." "Good," he said. "You should know that." The condiment caddy was at his end of the table because he had used it, and had not passed it because he had not yet had reason to pass it. And when he reached for his water, she was reaching for something on the same end of the table, and their hands arrived in the same space at approximately the same time, in the way of two people, occupying a shared table, who have not yet calibrated the spatial logistics of the sharing. And he said sorry with the easy reflexiveness of a person to whom shared table logistics were a normal part of the social environment, and moved the caddy to the center. She had not said anything. She had not said anything because the sorry had been reflexive and genuine, and had been directed at her in the plain way of an apology for a minor spatial inconvenience, with no calculation and no context and no register of the specific. Invisible truth that people did not apologize to her for minor spatial inconveniences, because people did not register minor spatial inconveniences caused to her as requiring apology. She was looking at the caddy in the center of the table. "The Cathari logistics specialist," she said, not because it was relevant but because she needed to say something, and this was in the vicinity of the conversation. "In the Bay 3 incident, did he also file a report?" Tam looked up. "I didn't know there was a Cathari logistics specialist involved." "There was a Bay 3 inventory run 2 weeks after mine," she said. "I saw the record in the cross-referencing. Different analyst, Cathari, different client. Do you know if they flagged the temperature readings?" "The record was filed with the Cathari Commercial Oversight Board rather than the station systems," she said. "I don't have access to their internal filing, but if they flagged it, it might already be in a third documentation chain," he said, "which means the maintenance office has 3 separate incident records. 2 of which they know about and 1 of which they don't know exists," she said. "Which means when we cross-reference ours, we can include a note indicating the probable existence of a third record from the Cathari Commercial Board, which would trigger the mandatory inquiry protocol rather than just the escalated response," he said. She looked at him. He was looking at the table with the expression of someone working through a problem, not at her in the way that she had learned to expect people to look at her when she said something useful. Not with surprise, not with the specific quality of recalibration that indicated they had not expected the useful thing from her, but with the straightforward attention of someone following the logic regardless of who had provided it. Yes, she said. That's better than I thought it was going to be this morning, he said, with the satisfaction of a man whose bureaucratic problem had found a better bureaucratic solution than he had anticipated. Do you want to do the cross-reference jointly? You have the cargo office contact. I have the maintenance record. She looked at him. This was a question about joint professional action between two people who had been sharing a table for 22 minutes. And the question was practical, and the suggestion was logical, and he had asked it with the plain efficiency of someone identifying the most effective approach to a shared problem. And she had no reason to say no, except the reasons she always had for not doing things like this, which were the reasons she was examining from the outside for the first time, because a man had asked if the seat was taken. Yes, she said. He nodded. Contact information. She transferred her station contact information to his datapad through the local exchange. He transferred his. It was a practical transaction, two colleagues coordinating on a facility compliance issue. And it was also in the interior accounting that had been running since the word sorry for the condiment caddy, a transaction she had not predicted this meal containing. The communal bread basket in the center of the table had been full when he arrived, and was now down to one piece, and he reached for his water at the same time she noted the bread. And he said, "The last one's yours if you want it," with the ease of a man who had noted the same thing, and had made the social calculation in the plain way of someone for whom the calculation was ordinary. She wanted it. She had been aware of wanting it for approximately 4 minutes and had been not taking it because there was one piece left and there were two people at the table, and taking the last piece of something when there were two people at a table was. She took it. She took it without thinking about it further, because the thinking had been going on for 4 minutes and had been replaced, in the moment of reaching for it, by the simple fact of wanting it, which was sufficient. She ate it. Tam finished his food and stacked his tray for return and said it had been useful, the regulation and the cross-reference plan, and that he would send the joint filing through the station system tomorrow morning. She said she would have the cargo office contact forwarded by 9. He said good. He picked up his tray. He said it was good to meet her. Good to meet you, she said, and the sentence was true in the simple way and in the other way, which was that it was the first time in a long time that meeting someone had been a good thing rather than a neutral transaction conducted as carefully as possible to minimize the damage from proximity. He left. She sat at the corner table in the crowded cantina with her datapad open to the inventory analysis, which she was not doing, and she sat with the specific, unfamiliar quality of 26 years of carefully constructed interior architecture, encountering something that had, in 40 minutes, produced a crack that was not in the original blueprints, and that she was now looking at from the inside with the mixed quality of a person who has spent a long time maintaining a structure, and has become suddenly uncertain whether all of it needs maintaining. The walls were not gone. She was clear-eyed about this in the specific, honest way she was clear-eyed about structural assessments. Walls built over 26 years from the material of 26 years of conditioning did not fall in 40 minutes over a shared cantina table. The crack was real and the crack was new, and the crack had gone all the way through on the piece about the bread, and she was going to need to think about what that meant. She thought about it on the walk home. She thought about it in her quarters. She thought about a man who had said sorry for a condiment caddy, and had moved it to the center of the table without any calculation about whether the center was where it belonged. She thought about being asked rather than told. She thought about being asked what the inventory was for. She thought about the regulation she had mentioned, and the way he had said that is extremely useful with the plain quality of someone noting a true thing, not with the quality of someone surprised by the source. She thought about the follow-up question about the weight classification drift, which had been the question that got at the interesting part of the problem, which meant he had been following the logic rather than performing interest in the logic. She thought about someone who worked in a loading bay on Verath Station, knowing the interesting part of a pharmaceutical transit documentation problem. She thought about 26 years and the specific, careful architecture of the walls, which had been built to protect her from wanting things she had been taught she did not deserve, and which were encountering for the first time. Evidence that the premise of their construction might have been incorrect, not the small, easily dismissed evidence of a single good interaction, but the specific, destabilizing evidence of a man who had done ordinary things in an ordinary way and produced, through the ordinariness, a revelation. The revelation was not that the walls were wrong to have built. She had needed them. The walls had been correct for the environment they were built in, and she was not going to simplify 26 years of a real environment into a thing that had been wrong, because it had not been wrong. It had been her environment, and she had survived it, and the walls had been part of surviving it. The revelation was that the environment had a door she had not found yet, and the door was currently located in a loading bay section on Verath Station, and it was the size of a question mark on the end of a sentence about a chair. The cantina the following evening had the same shift and density, the same ambient noise, the different table arrangement that happened when occupancy patterns redistributed. Her usual corner was taken. She found a table near the window, not a corner, which was a different spatial experience, one that required a different kind of calibration. She set up her datapad. She ordered her food. She did the inventory analysis, which was in its final stages and required the specific, focused attention of reconciliation work. She did the inventory analysis for 11 minutes before she became aware, through the peripheral monitoring she had spent 26 years developing, that Tam Voss was scanning the cantina with the practical expression of a man who had come from a long shift and was doing spatial accounting. He found her table. He found her at the table. His expression produced the specific, unremarkable quality of recognition, not the recognition of someone who had decided that finding her was significant, just the recognition of a person who had eaten with someone yesterday and was registering the familiar face the way anyone registered familiar faces in shared spaces, as a pleasant ordinarity. He walked over. "Thermal regulator is fixed," he said. "Maintenance escalated it this morning after the joint filing." "That was faster than expected," she said. "The third Cathori record existed," he said. "It was in the commercial board system, flagged 6 weeks ago. 3 records triggered the mandatory inquiry, which apparently bypasses the resource allocation review entirely." He had the specific, satisfied expression of a man whose "How did the cargo office respond?" "They have not yet responded," she said. "They have 2 standard days before the response becomes formally overdue." "You're expecting them not to respond?" "I am expecting them to respond after 2 days with a document that attempts to explain the discrepancy without acknowledging the documentation dating," she said. "At which point the compliance chain escalates automatically." He looked at her with the following the logic expression. "You've done this before." 3 times, she said. "The pattern is consistent." 3 times, he said. "What happened to the relay stations?" She told him. He listened with the quality she had spent last night thinking about. Not the performance of listening, not the charitable engagement of someone who had decided to be interested, but the actual interest of a person who wanted to know what happened to the relay stations. She told him in the full version, and the full version took 11 minutes, and he asked 2 questions during the 11 minutes that indicated he had been following at the level where the questions were the right questions, and she answered the questions fully. "That's 3 compliance actions that resulted in certification review," he said. "In how long?" 2 years, she said. "The transit broker I work for specializes in cold chain pharmaceutical routing. The documentation compliance is critical. Because people get bad pharmaceuticals," he said. "Yes," she said. "Do they know you filed 3 compliance actions in 2 years?" She paused. The question was about her professional standing with her employer, which was a category of question she had been asked occasionally, and which she had a calibrated answer for, a careful, minimizing answer designed to not overclaim. She was aware of having the calibrated answer available. She was aware that she was about to not use it. "They know," she said. "The broker's reputation in cold chain compliance is partly built on the accuracy of the documentation reviews. My work contributes to that reputation." He nodded. "Good," he said. "You should know that too." She looked at him. He said things like this, plain things that assessed her work in the plain way of someone noting a true fact, with a consistency that she had now documented across 2 meals, and that she was treating, in the interior accounting, as data rather than anomaly. The sample size was insufficient for conclusions. The pattern was establishing itself regardless. "The Transit Institute on Solon Prime," he said. "That's where you trained." "Yes," she said. "How long is the program?" She told him. He asked about the curriculum. She told him about the curriculum in the abbreviated version, and he asked the question that indicated the abbreviated version was insufficient, and she told him in the full version, which covered the documentation methodology track and the regulatory compliance framework, and the cross-species trade law component that had been, she told him, the most difficult and most interesting part of the program, in approximately equal measure. He asked about the cross-species trade law. She told him about the cross-species trade law. She had been talking for 14 minutes when she became aware that she had been talking for 14 minutes, and she did not stop. She did not stop because the censoring reflex had fired, and she had looked at it in the specific, examining way she had been looking at her reflexes since last night, and had found it in this context unwarranted. She was talking about her professional training to a person who had asked about her professional training and was listening with genuine interest, and the censoring reflex existed to prevent her from taking up too much space, and she was assessing whether she was taking up too much space, and the assessment was no. He had asked. He was listening. The space was shared between 2 people and she was using her half of it. She finished the point about the cross-species trade law. She picked up her water. "The regulatory compliance track," he said. "Is that where you learned the maintenance regulation?" "Adjacent to it," she said. "The facility management code was supplementary reading." "You read the supplementary reading?" "I read all of it," she said. "I know," he said. "That was clear last night." He said it without the specific quality that would have made it a compliment designed to produce a response, not with the warmth of someone trying to make her feel good, but with the plain recognition of someone noting something they had assessed as true. "I have been in operations for 11 years, and I don't read the supplementary reading." "The supplementary reading is where the useful regulations are," she said. "Clearly," he said. She was looking at her food. She was aware that she was smiling, not the managed, careful expression she deployed in social transactions, but the specific, involuntary version that arrived when something was genuinely funny in the dry, particular way that she found things funny, which was a version she had not deployed in the presence of another person in a long time, because deploying it in the presence of another person required either not caring what they made of it or trusting that they would not make anything of it that she would need to manage. She looked up. He was eating with the expression of a man who had said something that had landed and was pleased about it in the uncomplicated way of someone for whom making someone smile was a good outcome and not a strategy. She did not manage the smile. She let it be there, in the plain way of something that was simply what her face was doing, and she ate her food, and the conversation continued. At the end of the meal, the point where the trays had been cleared and the datapad was back in her bag, and the cantina around them was doing the later in the cycle thing, where the density had eased slightly, and the noise had shifted from the productive density of people eating quickly to the looser quality of people who had eaten and were staying because they were not quite ready to go home. There was a specific, unstructured interval of the kind that followed completed meals, when the people at the table had not reached the end of the conversation. She was aware of the interval. She was aware that it was unstructured. She was aware that she was not leaving, and that he was not leaving, and that the not leaving was a decision on both sides rather than an inertia, and that decisions about not leaving were a category of decision she had not been in the habit of making. The Bay 3 situation, she said. Now that the maintenance has been escalated, is the rotation backlog going to clear? By the end of the week, he said. The cold chain cargo's been held pending the regulator repair. Once the temperature certification is back in spec, we can process the held inventory, including the pharmaceutical transit that came through last cycle, she said. Including that, yes. He looked at her. Was that part of your current inventory run? Adjacent to it, she said. Different broker, same routing chain. Small world, he said. Verath Station is a major cold chain transit node, she said. The routing chains converge here frequently. So you're probably going to be running documentation through here regularly. For the next several months, yes, she said. This routing contract has 4 remaining cycles. He nodded. The interval continued. Outside the window, Verath Station was doing its station thing. The freight corridor visible from the cantina window showing the slow, regular movement of cargo vessels in the holding pattern. The specific and unchanging rhythm of a working station that did not stop because the shift had ended. I'll probably be in the cantina most evenings, he said. The shift rotation is consistent. She looked at the window, she looked at her bag. She looked at the question she had been building toward across the interval, which was the question she had decided on in her quarters last night, and had been deciding whether to ask since she sat down, and which she was going to ask now because the interval was the moment, and the moment was available, and she had been practicing, across 2 meals, a different relationship to the space she was allowed to take up. Will you be here tomorrow? She said. He looked at her. Cargo rotation permitting, he said. Probably yes. All right, she said. She picked up her bag. She stood. She said good night in the plain way of someone ending a meal and meaning the word simply. He said good night. She walked out of the cantina into the station's evening corridor, which was the corridor she walked every evening, and which had the same lights and the same traffic and the same quality of a working station between shifts. She walked through it differently. Not dramatically, the corridor was the same corridor. She was the same person. The walls she had spent 26 years building were still there and would be there tomorrow, and were not going to be resolved by 2 evenings in a cantina and a question she had managed to ask. She was not naive about what walls were made of or how long they took to change. She was walking through the corridor thinking about the question and the answer and the probably yes, and the specific quality of probably yes from someone who had said, "Is this seat taken with the same casual courtesy 2 evenings ago?"